We're coming to you from the Kampala Serena Conference Center, and tonight our conversation, I mean, it's well beyond the 16 days of activism, but I guess activism never stops. So we're speaking about sexual violence in institutions and workplaces. And in the studio with me, I have Dr. Izobia Baine from Makerere University, Directorate of Gender Mainstreaming. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And next to her is Sam Semaganda, who is a journalist, author, and women activist. Sam, it's good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Josephine.
All right. And on this side, in the studio audience, we have Anne Gamurara, who is the Executive Director of CDFU. Thank you for joining us, Anne.
Thank you and good evening.
All right. And finally, we have Marion Chirabo, who is a student and also currently the Minister of Gender, Ethics and Integrity with the Makerere Students Guild. Thank you, Marion, for coming.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right. Let's say it as it is. Well, once again, as we begin this conversation, this show is done in collaboration with the CDFU, UN Women, and the Embassy of Sweden. Now, there's a writer who said academia is fertile territory for those who want to leverage their power to gain sexual favors or inflict sexual violence on vulnerable individuals. But it's not just in schools. We are seeing sexual violence now in the workplace, in families, and on the street. So tonight we want to ask, is it enough to call for the removal of sexual offenders? Where are the gaps and who should cover them? I'm not sure where to start from. I'll start with you, Dr. Izobia, because I mean, Makerere has been in the news for quite a bit. And I'm curious to know what the university is doing about all this, all the conversation that's been happening there.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Yeah, the university has had a policy against sexual violence since 2006, and that policy was reviewed in 2018 after more than 10 years of implementation, and some things were not happening. So the university found it fit to review the policy and try and plug some holes that were within the policy so that it can be more effective. And so far, we are almost towards the end of the implementation of the first year of the reviewed policy, and the feedback is positive so far. Okay. Because we have more cases being reported compared to previously when the policy was formulated. For example, the previous policy did not accept anonymous complaints, and yet we realized that over time, when you get an anonymous complaint and you follow it through, most times you find there's a case to pursue. Then secondly, in the previous policy, the responsibility to investigate was vested within the unit. For example, if you are in a faculty X and there is a case that is reported, then it would be the head of that unit to constitute the investigation. And that, over time, we realized that actually it was not working because, humanly speaking, it's not easy to investigate a colleague. Yeah. But now the responsibility has been put to a committee that is constituted across the university, taking into account the different seniorities, categories of staff, students, and then it is a standing committee. The members are constituted, we train them, and then the responsibility for coordinating the investigation was also rested in the Directorate of Gender Mainstreaming. These members are from within the university? Yes, they are from within the university.
So we are assuming they are not going to be the culprits as well?
In terms of procedure, for example, if a case is reported in my unit, and there is a member on that committee from my unit, that person does not qualify to be on that committee.
When we speak about sexual harassment, and now this is to all of us, what are those unique forms of sexual harassment that we rarely talk about, that the ones that don't make headlines? You know, what are those underlying, frequently, not frequently heard of forms? Yes, Marion.
Especially for me, who has really dealt with these cases, there were girls who will come to me, for example, that they were at a party and a boy comes out of nowhere and pulls down her skirt just to embarrass her. That is a form of sexual harassment. Or we have been also working on cases, there's a certain case in a hostel that I was working on whereby, the custodian will come and grope her butt and also brush against her breasts, and he would do it occasionally. And when the girls come up to speak about these things, the reaction from the public is that there is really nothing, there is no, let me say, harm, physical harm. Okay, yes, he brushed against your breast, but what happened?
So they're looking at it in terms of this one has been raped. For you, they've just tapped you. Exactly. What are you talking about?
So it's not so. Most of the times it has to happen so often, and that is when the girl will eventually come out when she's tired of being demeaned and her dignity on several occasions.
Does catcalling, whistling, when you're walking and they're saying sister, sister, saizi yange, does this qualify as sexual harassment?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
It does.
So when do we get to term something as sexual harassment?
The definition, and I'll go by the policy that we have in Makerere, is that any unwanted sexual advances.
Okay. So
it has to be unwanted and it has to be sexual, but also people add that it must, it's not necessarily that it must have happened repeatedly. Even if it just happened once, it still qualifies as sexual harassment. Okay. But people will tell you in order for you to beef up a case, there has to be
more than one.
Yeah, more than one. There has to be a pattern that this person.
I mean, maybe they were just walking past you and their hand straight.
Yes, that's what they would say.
Okay, I have a question for you, Sam. I know you're a women activist, but again, I mean, you're a man. Why do men think it is okay?
Thank you, Josephine. First of all, you will pardon me. I think I have the worst voice on TV today. Mm-hmm. I'm dealing with a bit of a cold, but I'll find a way to get this done. I think a lot of issues we're grappling with here, especially things to do with gender-based violence, and most importantly, violence against women and girls. Before we get to understand most of these headaches, these questions that we're grappling with, we need to appreciate that at the very bottom of all these discussions sits something we call patriarchy. Now, let me say something about patriarchy. Patriarchy is a social system that, first of all, propagates and then promotes male dominancy. When you hear her speak about, the advances, the unwanted sexual advances that men push onto women, and when someone makes maybe, some noise about it, even if it's just once, because for me, in my case, once is enough. It doesn't have to be twice or thrice. Once should be just enough. Our discussion should start with once, because once breeds a lot of things ahead. Mm. Do you know the effect of just once can do? Because sometimes we think it should be about 100 times for someone to have the effect, or to be, to have an adverse effect on you. So once is enough. Now, patriarchy has had us to believe that men, whatever it is that they choose to do with their hands or with their mouth or with their eyes or whatever it is that they need to use as an organ, is acceptable. And that's where we've been. And it's been rooted in our societies. That's where we're coming from. So patriarchy is still something. And because men are the most, they make up majority selfish. I would want to use the word selfish intentionally. Selfish beneficiaries of patriarchy. And I keep thinking to myself, yes, men have power, but it's time for men to use their power positively.
Usually when a man comes out and starts to champion causes like this, then people say, what's in it for him? So why is this a conversation that's important to you, for you?
Many times when a man comes up to talk about issues to do with the rights of women and girls, there is a tendency of men thinking, oh, you've crossed now to the female side. Those are conversations for women. And for me, I keep asking myself, are you talking about a woman as a half human being, a girl as a half human being? These are fully complete human beings. So if you ask me, treat her with dignity, you man, not simply because she's a woman, but because first, she's human.
Okay.
The moment you recognize this is a fellow human being, complete human being, that's where all the discussion should end.
We have countries that are now fining men for street harassment. So I read that in France, in the first year when this was started, about 700 men were fined in 1 year. What hard lines should we take for this to actually become a taboo in Uganda? Dr. Izobia.
I think for me, everything is contextual. France was fining the street harassers, but then at the beginning of this campaign of 16 days of activism, there was a demonstration in France where 1 in 3 women have been battered by their male partners, husbands. So the question is, in every situation, whether it is in the street, whether it is at home, whether it is at the workplace, there has to be zero tolerance. Because sexual violence happens in a continuum. This person who is whistling at a female in the street will be the same person actually who will rape a woman in a secluded place. So if you cannot recognize that problem of whistling, of belittling, then chances are high that even when a rape happens, you will still pay a deaf ear. So the zero tolerance has to be built across the whole system.
What does zero tolerance look like?
Means that it is unacceptable.
How do you begin?
Verbally, and also in terms of calling out the person perpetuating that problem.
How do you begin to enforce that?
Through policies and procedures. And by the way, policies many times are both written and unwritten. We started when I was talking about the written policy. But before you reach the written policy, there will be norms that people practice when they are not even written down. For example, the example the student has given you. What is it that makes this student think that he's entitled to pull that skirt of that woman, to embarrass her? Why should he get that satisfaction? It means there has to be a system that first of all calls out to this person who is doing that what you're doing is not acceptable by any decent human being. And when that persists, then that's when you get now to the written policy, and then you follow the right procedure in terms of now giving sanctions to people who are not conforming to what is considered acceptable within the society.
And
Yeah.
Many of these practices begin in the home, the way we are brought up, the socialization. When a boy is growing up, he sees boys like him catcalling, doing all that sexual offenses against girls. And his idea of being a man is enshrined in that. When I grow up, I'll be doing this and this like my elder brothers and my friends. So it is, I think, the socialization, and it is allowed by the community. Because of that, this boy grows up with the idea that it is okay to catcall, to harass women, because I am a man, I'm entitled.
okay. All right, let's take a short break and we'll pick up from there when we return. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. We're talking tonight about sexual violence in institutions and workplaces. And this particular episode is done in collaboration with CDFU, UN Women, and the Embassy of Sweden. We're going to take some questions from the audience. We'll start with you.
My name is Julius Mtabaz, a student peer trainer from Makerere University. You've talked about PWJK as the basement that is bringing about all the sexual violence. And we know that in most cases, even the way children are brought up in homes, it promotes male dominance. For example, if you have 2 kids, you'll find that a boy, if a parent is to buy a toy, is going to give this kid a gun toy, and this one is going to be given maybe a doll, which is a baby sort of. So what do you think is the best way to address this PWJK, given that even the way children are brought up in society is promoting that male dominance? Thank you so much.
I'm assuming by PWJK we're talking about patriarchy, right?
Patriarchy, yeah.
Okay.
It's important to recognize that all kids are children. Like, these are all human beings. Whatever possibly a girl cannot do, a boy can still do. Get them exposed to a number of things the world can offer as children. And then you monitor them as they grow up. And then you'll see how they can blossom. Because you could, not so long ago, I think about a couple of weeks ago, I was having a chat with a very good friend of mine who is now a pilot of the bombardiers we have.
Is he a she or he?
It's a she.
Okay.
And I was listening, I was very interested in listening to her story of how her father never stopped her to go about all these things, technology, airplanes and things like that. And I'm like, okay, this is a conversation we need to take back to our families and where we start from. I mean, what harm is it for a man to buy toys? You can buy 2 guns, one for a boy and one for a girl.
Well, let's go for a toy car, not guns.
Okay, sorry. Okay, let's speak, for example, buy 2 plain toys and give one to a boy and give one for a girl. Let them blossom. Let them explore. Let them go. Okay. I think this is where we need to take it.
All right, so we're talking about back home, our communities.
Back home, communities.
And I think right now there's a lot of emphasis being given to early childhood education. Exactly. And the way schools are handling this with young children. You want to add something?
Yes, I think we need to look at it again from a multi-sectoral approach. Because even when you talk about socialization, there are so many agents. There is the family, which is very important, a very basic unit, but then you go into the schools, the cultural institutions, even at the university, people are still being socialized. We should not underestimate the power of agency, individual agency, because even within these spaces, there are people who have transcended those received wisdom, so to speak. So it is important for us to look at the family, which is very important, but the family is not the only one. Because as a mother, I know raising children, you're competing with so many other institutions. You will be raising your children positively at home, bringing all these things like he's suggesting, but there will be a teacher somewhere in the school who is telling the children that, you know, it is the father who pays fees, even when the child knows that actually it is the mother who has paid at that particular time, or the child knows that it is a combined effort. So yes, it's very important to look at the different agents and how we are going to influence, because all of them, they work in tandem, either to socialize us negatively or re-socialize us positively.
I think we put teachers in a bit of a difficult place, because so the teachers, and not to take away from what you've said,
yes,
the teacher should know that this is a single parent home, this one is unpaid. You know, how do they start to have those conversations with the pupils and not say, because they've also been socialized to
yes,
say, this is the structure of a family, and
yes,
this is so-and-so's role in the
yes,
family.
And that's why the question of where you start from is very important. Because you cannot wait to say that, okay, it is only in the family, because the same people from the family are the ones going to the schools. There are many interventions that can be done. For example, even when you look at the teacher training, for example, me, I'm not originally a teacher. I am a social scientist. But I ended up in education precisely because of that issue. We were expecting a lot from the teachers. But then what kind of interventions have we made in terms of their training? I did my doctorate actually in the question of teacher training. I was interested in what kind of capacity are we building with these teachers for them to become the positive change agents that we all require them. So the point I'm making is that at the family we need interventions. In the schools we need interventions. We are here, some of these students we are working with on our program, because you must start at where you are. Okay. You cannot say, I will wait for the teachers to first get this information before I talk to the parents. So everybody has a role to play in perpetuating this problem, just like they have a role in solving the problem, provided they have the right information.
All right, let's take your question.
Thank you. My name is Kutesa Victor from Makerere University, and my question is going to all of you, I think.
All of them.
All of you.
Yes.
Yeah. And I am asking, what is done about the private space? Every prevention strategy is more in the public space, and we are looking at consent mainly, and saying where there is no consent, probably someone should not go ahead. But there are places where there is consent, and what is consented is actually very wrong. So my question is, how do we get into the private space where people are having, especially at the university, relationships, and someone is harassing another simply because they are their boyfriend? I'm your boyfriend and you are my property, so I can do this to you. So I'm asking, we are concentrating on the public space, where men on the streets and people in the public, but what have we done about the private space where people are owning ladies, owning people and saying, this is mine, I will do this to her, I will do this to him, they are mine?
I think that is a very important question. And from a gender perspective, or from gender studies perspective, there's actually no difference between the private and the public. I know in the literature a lot has been written about, the separation between the private and the public. But from a feminist standpoint, there's no difference. You cannot tell me that you'll be harassing women in your workplace and the ones you have at home are having it easy. It doesn't happen. So I know the private space is difficult to penetrate, but for me, if you can even have change in the public space, that change will feed into the private space.
Maybe I should add something. There's something called character. It's a very personal thing.
Yes.
Character is not something you pick home and then you leave at the gate and then you find something else, in a university or school. It's always part of you. So once you've been sensitized, once you've been brought to understand some of the dynamics we're dealing with here, if it changes, if it has an impact on your character, it will have that impact in the public and private space, continuously, gradually.
I was going to ask, does naming and shaming help? Is it helping? Have we seen it help, for example, at Makerere?
It is a fact that even those who are harassing will not harass openly. So naming and shaming can help. But the question is, who accepts? Because many times the dominant group would want to protect the harassers. I think that's the challenge we have to deal with. But otherwise, the harassers will not want to be known by the public that they are harassers. And they take advantage of the private spaces where harassment happens. Because, like he's saying, most times it happens in the private space, which is outside what we see. And that's why the harassers can say, no, she's lying. She's just framing me. There's nobody who will come and say it is true. It is only the evidence that can demonstrate that somebody is harassing. So if we have the evidence and we name and shame, it can help. Because, human beings, when you know somebody is watching, there's a tendency to at least hold back. To
contain yourself.
Yes.
Marian, you wanted to say something?
Particularly on his thing, I do know that one of the components of the proposed sexual offences bill was actually to make sexual harassment something punishable by law. And I think that is one of the things that the legislators were trying to put across in order to make sure that this actually becomes an offense that anyone can actually take. But also, the law talks about indecent, how do I call it? indecent assault. However, I would say that the difficulty with this, particularly the enforcement of this particular offense, is that when you go to a police station because someone has groped your butt, I just imagine the conversation that is going to happen between the police
How are you
officers.
dressed?
Yes, exactly. How were you dressed? Where were you going?
What time of, what was it, at night?
Was it at night? Particularly, I remember that a few students had come to me at one time, and they were complaining that the policemen had come for an orientation about sexual harassment. And one policeman said that, if you were caught in a boys' room, don't bother coming to report to me. So particularly, I think how civil society and especially activists have gone about it is that for some of these things to be enforced, there needs to be sensitization also among the enforcement, the policemen. I particularly, I followed a campaign, He for She, and they went into the police enforcement, sensitizing them, because it's all about socialization. Yeah. When something has been normal for such a long time, you see that the policemen are also a product of their society. So it really helps to kind of the mindset change so that some of these offenses can actually be enforced. Yes.
Okay. Well, you were speaking, I mean, we've all spoken about culture, and I remembered a quote that someone said that dysfunctional systems are not fixed through knee-jerk reactions. We need culture change that makes a difference in the long run. And I don't know if any of you want to speak to that, to culture, changing things from the grassroots.
Yeah, it's very important. When earlier when I mentioned something to do with the patriarchy, and you will check that one of the biggest institutions that have perpetuated patriarchy are cultural institutions. You know, that this is how things were, and this is about male dominancy and all that. And I'm thinking, as we look at a holistic approach in addressing some of these issues, we need to take it down to the cultural institutions. And it's always a very delicate work when you're getting down to engage with cultural institutions, because these are institutions that have been here forever, for so long, and you need to be very tactical and very skillful with your approach. And I've been talking to someone not so long ago before I got here, and what kind of having a simple deliberation on these issues. And I said, I think the way we've gotten it wrong with engaging cultural institutions is to design policies and take to them, than inviting them to be part of the policies that we're designing to address issues, because they are very rigid, they are very staunch, they are very strong in their beliefs. So if we are going to engage cultural institutions that have been so big in perpetuating a lot of this patriarchy, we've got to bring them in. We've got to take them on step by step.
They should own the process.
They should own the process, so that when they go back to talk to their subjects, to talk to their people, it's coming from them. And many times, things to do with culture, people don't question.
All right, let's take a short break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. We are speaking tonight about sexual violence in institutions and workplaces, and we're taking questions from the audience. Yes, Carido.
Thank you, Josephine. Mine is a very small but very important. I'm talking about ladies who take advantage of the ongoing campaigns, and for selfish reasons, they frame either their bosses or their lecturers or public figures who are male. And in our laws, there is nothing that holds them accountable, because in these things of relationships, it is practically between the two of you. There is no witness, there is no. So what are you doing as experts of this? What are you doing to kind of mediate, to kind of solve this? Because I see it a big problem where a lady will just think, I can say this and I will still be defended.
Okay.
And it will cause moral degeneration.
Dr. Isoke?
Yeah, in our context in the university, making a false accusation is equally punishable. It's taken as seriously as harassment. That is by policy. However, I want to add one thing. What drives sexual violence is the question of stigma. And the stigma that surrounds anybody who reports. I acknowledge framing is real, but if you have 100 cases of sexual violence, you'll have 1 or 2 maybe of real framing. That's why you don't see many of them. Of course, when it happens, it's terrible. It's equally terrible. But I would really want to us to spend a lot of effort in finding ways of how we can solve real harassment.
Okay.
Real harassment happens and people get away with it. There is impunity. That's the problem.
If a university student, just so that he can get a, just know that it's actually a serious thing. If a university student frames a lecturer or a fellow student, what happens?
It is equally investigated.
Okay.
You see, it's the same thing like saying that are men sexually harassed? And the answer is yes. And if a man is sexually harassed, he equally makes a complaint, it is equally investigated, and if the person harassing him is found guilty, they are equally punished according to the policy. The challenge is even to get the men to acknowledge that actually the policy is also meant for them.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Another question?
My concern is for the woman in the workplace. There's been a lot of effort in educational institutions. People are talking about the curriculum and teachers and all that. But for in the workplace, I really see it's rampant, and I would like to know what is being done. I'm looking at the woman both in the corporate workplace and maybe in the urban centers, in the marketplaces. What is being done for that woman? Because they experience harassment physically, verbally, and psychologically. Thank you.
Particularly for the woman in the workplace, there's the Employment Act, and it really talks about sexual harassment. Although I would say it's inadequate in addressing the whole matter, but that is the first remedy that a woman in a workplace has. It sets out the procedure of how to make a complaint, who you make a complaint to. I would say that, you see, the conversation about sexual harassment is a conversation that has just started. Or let me say that people are now
maybe it's just
opening
picking up speed.
Yeah, it's just picking up. So even when you look at the Employment Act, even it seems to have been something that someone just thought, oh, other countries have laws about sexual harassment. Let's just mention it, here. So because it has things like you have to have above, it seems to suggest that you have to be above a certain number of employees. Is it 12?
It's 25.
25. So that means that if you have less than 25 employees, that means you can afford not to have a sexual harassment policy, as if to suggest that if you have below 25 employees, there's no possibility of sexual harassment happening. So yes, it's a bit problematic, but that is the remedy that we have for now. I would say, like I said before, the Sexual Offences Bill is supposed to try and remedy some of those gaps we in the workplace, in the private sector, between relationships and all that. But getting the bill passed is also another issue, I'd say.
All right.
Maybe the other bit we could add to that, how about we engage? I think it would be also great if we engaged the arrangements that bring employers together and we get these people, because they employ these people. Have we sensitized employers? There's an association, I think. There could be an association of employers. Have we taken this message to them? Have we brought them on board on some of these issues? I think it should also be very, very important, because these are the people that go back and treat these people, they employ the way they choose to do. So I think it's also very important as an approach.
Dr. Isabia.
Yeah, I think the partnerships are very important. If you look at the employment sector in our country, there are many laws that are ignored without consequences. Issues around maternity leave, issues around a right to a contract, issues around the right to pay for equal work. There are all those issues. So it's not just the question of sexual violence, but there are many aspects. And I think that is where the partnerships become very, very important between the different sectors, civil society, institutions of higher learning through research and community engagement. Because you can imagine the problems that are in the formal sector, where you know that this is an established hierarchy or bureaucracy and we are struggling. Then in the private space that becomes even more important. So I think we need more partnerships in terms of engaging with employers. I know there is a Federation of Women Employers and some work has been going on, but we need more and it needs scaling up.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's take our final question.
Thank you. Adekemasi is my name from Makerere University. My question is, we have empowered women, but most of them are saying that they don't have safe spaces to come out of to speak against gender-based violence. And especially most the girls at campus, they say, yeah, we have this, but we can't really go out there because we fear for our lives. How can we do that?
I think the key among in terms of implementation, there's a whole issue of victim protection or witness protection. I think that's where a lot of work needs to be done. Because at the end of the day, if that fear is not overcome, then the violence keeps getting perpetuated. Currently, I'm having 2 cases where I've not yet succeeded in convincing the students to actually make a formal complaint. One of them abandoned the course other than submitting to sexual harassment, and she went to another university when she had already done 50% of the course. And until that time when she has enough courage to stand up to the harasser, we are not progressing with the case. And for me it becomes quite frustrating, because if a victim cannot stand up to the harasser, then we are wasting time. So it's a challenge that we keep working around. But perhaps maybe one thing I can mention is that the victim needs to understand that by not coming out, that's how the vice gets perpetuated. And the harassers know that, and they take advantage of that, and that's how impunity gets perpetuated.
She was asking about safe spaces to report, and I know you are Minister of Ethics, so I think you're one person to report toward the university. And Dr. Izobia,
Yes.
you'd mentioned that there was a whole
Yes.
line of people. There's the police,
Yes.
there's, you know.
Yeah, we have many agencies. We call it the referral pathway. They can report to us as a directorate. They can report to the student leaders. They can report to the counseling unit. They can report to the police. They can report to anybody they feel comfortable with. And this person, as per the policy, has a responsibility to bring us the information, and then we set the investigation machinery in process. But you see, the victim knows that, they know that process. Like these students now, they know that process. What they need to overcome is to be ability to deal with the undue attention. Because when they report, many times they, as we have been talking, the focus shifts from the harasser to the victim. You know, where was she coming from? How could she be in such and such a place as this? So that is what really terrifies many of the victims.
My question is only one about, haven't heard anything about stigmatized, people being stigmatized in a way that...
Do you want to be a bit louder?
Okay. In a way that someone is, let's say someone is raped, how is that person being handled? That person is taken to a hospital, but the very person is being handled by a doctor, a male doctor, whereby a female is being raped, has been raped, but then the male doctor is the one taking care of her, which is kind of stigmatizing her, feeling the same thing that has happened to her.
All right. Dr.
Thank you
Isabel,
very much.
I think that's in line with you as well.
Yes. You see, that a male doctor who is sensitized about these issues is not necessarily a problem. Being a male doctor is not actually the problem. You can have a male doctor who is sensitive, provided they have the right information, the right mindset. Just like you can have a female doctor who can be actually more traumatizing by being so judgmental and all that. I think the most important issue we need to understand is what capacity do our service providers have to be sensitive to handle issues of gender-based violence, especially sexual violence. Yes.
We're going to wrap up our session for today, and I'll start with you, Anne. What would you like us to take home from this conversation? You've been rather quiet, so let's tickle you.
What we need to see is to see support. It's to see everyone talking the same language, right from home, right from the services, the service providers, the community at Makerere and elsewhere in places of work, and supported by policy. So if we all talk the same language, we would reduce sexual harassment both at the workplace and institutions.
Okay, all right. Marian?
To me, I think there needs to be an overhaul, culturally, socially, the way we see women's position in society, because everything, even if it's to do with sexual harassment, even if it's to do with wife battering, even if it's to do with things like FGM, it comes back to one thing, and that is patriarchy. It comes back to one thing, and that is the social setting, our position in society. So for violence against women to even decrease by a half, I would say, there needs to be a mindset change of how we look at women in our society, of how we treat women in our society.
Thank you very much, Marian. Sam?
One is for us to have an inter- and intra-institution conversation within institutions, whichever institution you think of, school, culture, home, and everywhere. And then these institutions should speak to each other about some of these things. And then it's also important for us to recognize that at the very bottom, like I said in the very beginning, is patriarchy. So until we address patriarchy as a society, and we understand that this is something we need to dismantle for us to be able to build and then to achieve what we want to achieve. And then it's also very important for us to accept that the beneficiaries of patriarchy have been men on a larger scale. So now is the point to get men on board, to get men involved in issues that have had women and girls suffer for so long. So it's a call that I make to all men out there to get on board and to play an active role in some of these issues. It's very important.
All right, thank you very much, Sam. Dr. Isabel, you want to close us up?
Yeah, thank you. I want to actually agree with Sam that the male agency in changing these situations is still lacking. We need mobilization of men who understand that this is wrong, who appreciate, to mobilize other men so that we can speak the same language, because violators are always known to all of us. There is no case we have handled in the university that was not known by colleagues. They know the fellow is harassing students, even staff, and they all hide under no evidence. But then the question is, did you bother to find the evidence? So we are always, massaging the problem. I think for me, if we can have an intervention, a mass movement of men who are open-minded, who take proactive steps to make sure that they fight the vice, we shall move a big step ahead.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Izobia, Sam, Anne, and Marion, and all of you for contributing to this conversation. That brings us to the end of it. Thank you for watching. Coming up is NTV Weekend Edition.